Picture this. You walk into a hyper-specific, neon-lit space. There's that distinct hum of fluorescent lights overhead, and the air just smells like cardboard and tense anticipation. It's a local Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. Now, on the surface, this room looks like an ecosystem of pure mechanical optimization, right? You've got players huddled around tables, executing these highly structured, almost robotic strategies. They are hyper-focused on probabilities, draw ratios, timing windows, and metagame analysis. To an untrained eye, it looks exactly like a simple mathematical competition, a test of strategic dominance. But there's actually a hidden layer operating just beneath the surface of this room. Today, in this explainer, we're going to explore how this seemingly niche card game environment actually serves as a stunningly accurate microcosm for one of the most profound civilizational shifts we're experiencing right now.
Okay, let's dive into this. The author of our source material spent a lot of time in these highly competitive environments and realized something deeply profound. The cards were never just cards, they're symbols. And I don't mean that in some abstract literary way. I mean they are active, living, social symbols. The specific decks these players choose, the exact sequences of moves they memorize and perform, it's all part of a massive, complex framework. People are literally using these little cardboard rectangles to orient themselves socially within that room. So what looks like a competitive card game rule set is in reality a profound ritual system. And just like any ritual system throughout human history, it carries some heavy, unwritten expectations about what true belonging and participation is actually supposed to look like.
Section 1, the rituals of legibility. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that to truly understand this space, we have to recognize that mastery isn't measured exclusively by who wins the game. Because think about it. If it were, any strategy that got you a victory would be immediately respected, right? But that is simply not what happens. A player actually has to communicate their competence through highly structured, recognizable forms. First, they need a familiar deck construction. Second, they have to use accepted strategic logic. And third, they must display visible effort. Basically, the ritual of how you play matters almost as much as the result itself. A practiced complex combo line tells the room, hey, I have internalized the system. It communicates that you've put in the agonizing hours of practice. You aren't just winning, you're proving your competence through a shared, visible struggle. And that brings us to a core concept here, legibility. It's defined as the demonstration of belonging within the cultural grammar of an environment through recognizable and interpretable rituals. So a player using a recognized meta deck is proving they understand the current landscape. They become legible to their peers. And this reveals a really fascinating contradiction about competitive spaces in general. They all claim to reward emergence, adaptation, and raw creativity. But in reality, they secretly reward stability and interpretability. People say they want disruptive innovation, but what they actually want is innovation that preserves symbolic continuity. They want you to win, sure, but they want you to win in a way they already understand. Section 2. Disruption of altered symbols. So, what happens when someone breaks this unspoken agreement? What happens when a rogue strategy is introduced? One that just entirely bypasses the accepted ritual structure? Well, the atmosphere in the room shifts, and it shifts drastically. It changes emotionally, not strategically, but emotionally. You can literally watch confusion and frustration spread across people's faces in real time. Why? Because the sacred heuristics of the game have just been violated. A player sits down with a deck that simply shouldn't function according to the collective understanding of the group. The sequencing is irrational to them. This kind of disruption attacks the environment's shared assumptions about what competency is supposed to look like. Suddenly, the symbolic map of the whole room collapses. In these moments, you'll hear players say things like, wait, you can do that? That's not real Yu-Gi-Oh! Or they'll label the strategy as degenerate or uninteractive. Now, these reactions sound analytical, right? They sound like objective critiques of game mechanics. But they actually mask a much, much deeper sense of betrayal. The issue isn't simply that the newcomer found a mathematically stronger strategy. The real issue is that the newcomer completely bypassed the exact ritual pathway that the other players had subconsciously fused with legitimacy. Someone who ignored all of the sacred rules of visible effort is succeeding, and it deeply, deeply destabilizes the social grammar of the entire room. Let's move to Section 3 and see how this builds. The grief cycle. You see, when symbolic systems destabilize this rapidly, human beings react with an emotional architecture that is remarkably close to actual grief. It's wild to watch. Communities confronted with this kind of sudden, disruptive emergence cycle through very specific psychological phases. First, there's denial. Oh, that strategy only works because people just aren't familiar with it yet. Then comes anger.
This is completely unhealthy for the game. Next is bargaining. Well, okay, but it would never work consistently over time. And this inevitably leads to a profound existential discomfort. Wait, if this is actually viable, maybe my entire understanding of this game is incomplete. Finally, we reach absorption. The rogue strategy officially enters the ecosystem. People adapt, the culture rewrites itself, and eventually the very same community that vehemently rejected the mutation retroactively normalizes it. This cycle just repeats endlessly in competitive systems. Section 4. Generative AI Ritual Collapse. And this brilliantly illustrates the major civilizational pivot we need to talk about. Because this exact emotional architecture, this exact cycle of grief and symbolic destabilization we just mapped out in a local game store, is currently unfolding across global society right now. On one side, we have the UEO environment, built on combo sequencing, manual execution, and years of grueling repetition. On the other side, we have the modern creative economy. For decades, creative and technical identities were anchored to visible ritual processes. An artist sketching for thousands of hours, an engineer manually writing every single line of code, a musician enduring years of classical training. Just like the card players, these professionals built their entire identities around visible, agonizing processes. The process itself became the symbolic proof of their legitimacy. These rituals didn't just produce art or software, they produced social orientation and status. So when generative AI suddenly enters the scene, the reaction is literally identical. The public sees a complex app prototyped in hours, or an incredibly detailed, beautiful image generated instantly. And what do we hear? Wait, you can do that? That's not real art. That's not real engineering. They skipped the process. These statements perfectly, almost eerily, mirror the reactions of the card players to the rogue deck. Society is experiencing the exact same emotional destabilization. And the reason why is that generative systems sever the historical relationship between visible effort and perceived legitimacy. The collective discomfort we are feeling as a society isn't purely about what the AI is technically capable of. It's about ritual displacement. Section 5. Identity, Process, and Civilization. So the crucial point is this. To truly grasp the magnitude of what's happening, we have to explore this incredible intellectual tension right at the core of human nature. We fundamentally fuse our personal identity with our operational processes. A workflow is never just a workflow. People derive their deepest sense of self-worth from how they learned, how long they suffered to master their craft, which institutional pathways they survived, and which symbolic thresholds they crossed. When new generative systems completely bypass those agonizing pathways, the reaction feels incredibly personal, because the disruption is touching identity itself. The massive debates we're having around AI right now, they are rarely just about output quality or ethics or even job automation. They are instances of people desperately defending the symbolic structures that gave them belonging, status, and meaning in the world.
The threat is not merely automation. The threat is symbolic compression. This is the fear beneath the fear. The distance between a human's intention and the final execution of that intention is rapidly collapsing to zero. And as that distance collapses, society loses the traditional visual markers it has historically used to navigate expertise and legitimize effort. We are literally losing the navigational signals that tell us who has put in the work. The old symbols no longer map cleanly onto visible competence, and that creates a terrifying vacuum of meaning.
Which leaves us staring at this heavy existential question. If process changes, does identity survive the transition? Who is legitimate now? What does expertise actually look like when the ritual of effort is completely removed? These are not just technical debates about software capabilities. They are the ultimate civilizational ambiguities we now face, as our historical navigational systems erode right beneath our feet.
The cards were never just cards, and AI was never just AI. They both reveal the exact same uncomfortable truth about us. Human beings build entire civilizations out of symbolic agreements about what legitimacy is supposed to look like. We rely on these shared maps to know our place in a room, and ultimately our place in the world. When technological shifts destabilize these agreements faster than our culture can emotionally process them, we experience profound melancholic disorientation long before we ever reach understanding. So as we navigate this strange new era, ask yourself, which of your own rituals of legitimacy are you holding on to? And who will you be if they are no longer required?